Okay, so this is group two and our assignment one, talking about the development of professional identity in medical students. And for each of these, we kind of thought of both the identity of the individual as well as the focus of the identity formation of the learner, which is really what our major job was, to look at the identity formation of the learner or identity development of a medical student as they move into being a professional a physician. So first, for the learner's identity, the responsibility of the learners to develop an identity of the profession that is consistent with some basic attributes that the profession that make up that profession. They first need to learn a coding schema and behaviors that are expected of the profession. Many of these personal characteristics that they come into medical school with, um, I often say that they were taught by their mother. These were things that they came to medical school with, and these will be the basis for their identity formation as a professional. As they move through their medical education and as their roles change, they will be influenced by the identity uh, uh, of those that are, or their identity will be influenced by those that are around them. There are also societal expectations that will influence the learners, as well as an environment, including the curriculum, the geography in which they practice. Uh, in addition, learners influence each other, and exposure to other learners may influence the identity of each learner, and they make up part of what's often called the hidden curriculum. Much of the hidden curriculum are faculty and residents who are influencing the learners, but they also influence each other. The next identity is that of the professor, and the professor has their own individual identity that includes the responsibilities to the learner, the institution, their profession, uh, and their influences on the learner include first providing coding schemes and highlighting topics for the learners, producing the materials, the presentations, and demonstrations that the learners will use as a basis for learning the profession, influencing and modeling behaviors for the learner, and creating an environment for the learner. There are also influences of the learner on the professor, and those include first that the learner needs to entrust the professor because there's a hierarchical relationship. But despite that relationship, there are a lot of personal characteristics and prior experiences of the learner that can impact the professor. And as the identity of the learner shifts, the professor will need to adapt their coding and highlighting appropriately as the learner moves through the process of professional identity formation. The patient has their own identity, and this varies greatly from patient to patient and is influenced a lot by their access to the healthcare system, their health literacy, and their ease with working with each provider. And the patient can have influences on learners' identity formation, and that is, first, the patient serves as an important link between interacting between attendings and learners, and will help shape the process of coding and highlighting for the learner. The patient is usually a novice, but that can easily change as they become an expert in their own condition and may serve to teach the learner a great deal about not just their disease, but also about their relationship to their disease. The learners may also influence the patient's identity, increasing the empowerment and health literacy of the patient and providing another level of support and connection with the patient.
Moving on to society's influence on the professional development of physicians. As Bill formerly alluded to, formation of professional identity is an adaptive developmental process. And this, in fact, occurs simultaneously at two distinct levels. First of all, at the level of the individual, which focuses on his or her psychological developments as they adopt these roles in succession. In addition, at the collective level, this involves socialization of the person into appropriate roles and forms of participation in the community of practice. In other words, at each training level, an individual must move from the periphery, where she must abide by the expectations of the community, to the center, where she can now influence or change those expectations. And in fact, the collective needs of society will inform the learning objectives of the learners. So each successive generation may highlight or place greater emphasis on one status of health or treatment of disease more so than the previous generation. In fact, there have been two major society-driven calls for reform medical education. These took place approximately 100 years from one another. In 1910, Abraham Flexner published his original report on the need to reform medical education, and his assertions led to the standardization of admission standards, curriculum development, and licensing requirements. Then, a century later, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching published another report. And this really centered around four goals for medical education. First and foremost was the need to standardize learning outcomes, but individualize the learning process. This, in fact, has served as the major impetus for the current milestone initiative implemented by the ACGME, which is really now focusing on the need to have fixed outcome variable time training versus variable outcome fixed time training. In addition, there's been a much greater emphasis on health-based outcomes for both individual patients and populations at large. Another important emphasis that they placed was integration of formal knowledge and clinical experience, as well as the development of habits of inquiry and innovation for continuous improvement. Finally, and probably the most relevant to this discussion, is the focus on professional identity formation. At this time, the Carnegie Foundation really feels that there needs to be a greater sense of accountability and interconnectedness among specialties, and additional emphasis on multidisciplinary education, knowing that patients and populations cannot be treated in isolation. In addition, the learner can influence the identity of the community. Learners can impact the community and empower populations of patients to take control of their health. This can occur through community service initiatives, public education, participation in health fairs, and the provision of internet resources to make this knowledge more readily available to the population at large. To put it all together, I believe that this slide summarizes our discussion quite nicely. As we have said, professional identity formation is going to occur through a progression of distinct stages. First and foremost, individual learners are going to come in to the profession as novices, really having a lot of their norms, their beliefs and values molded by nature and nurture. So their family, their friends, their previous education, their socioeconomic status, their ethnicity is really going to inform those values at the very beginning. As they move into the community of practice, this is really where socialization is going to have its greatest impact on their professional development. As we said, they're going to move through distinct roles from the preclinical years to the clinical years, through residency, fellowship, as a new attending, and then finally as a seasoned attending. And during this time, through the socialization, they're going to be impacted by quite a few different stimuli. First and foremost will be their clinical and non-clinical experiences. So for example, a certain patient interaction or series of patient interactions may shape their attitudes and behaviors towards patients. That's going to have a huge impact. In addition, they're going to be exposed to role models and mentors, and the hope that these role models and mentors are demonstrating proper behaviors and proper attitudes, but as Bill mentioned, there is the tendency for the learning environment to at times be less than desirable, and that's where the hidden curriculum can certainly rear its ugly head. But during this time, there's going to be both the the conscious reflection of learning, where the learner will see their role model or their mentor partake in a certain activity. They're going to code, they're going to process and highlight what they've been seeing and start to reflect on it, and at times, and hopefully, incorporate that into their own belief system, own value system. In addition, they may also do this unconsciously, and this is something that needs to be brought to light to learners as they move, particularly into the clinical environments. And then finally, as they move into their personal and professional identities, they're again going to be informed by all of these. Their individual patient interactions, their interactions in their personal life, the healthcare system at large, and the needs for society. And it's going to be imperative that the physicians be adaptable and adjust their approach to medicine based on these needs. So this is truly a dynamic process, one that begins, one could say, well before they enter medical school and continues well beyond graduation.